My mom called me on a Tuesday evening and told me she had met someone, and I was genuinely happy for her, for about 45 seconds. That was exactly how long it took for her to tell me his age. My mom is 52 years old. She raised me mostly on her own after my dad left when I was 9, and she spent so many years putting everything into work and into me that she barely had time to think about herself, let alone date anyone seriously. So when she called me with that particular lightness in her voice, the kind I hadn't heard in years, my first reaction was pure joy. And then she said he was 28. I want to be clear about the math here, because I need you to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I am 30 years old. My mother's new boyfriend was 2 years younger than me. My mother, the woman who packed my school lunches and helped me with my homework and sat with me through every bad breakup I ever had, was dating someone who was closer to my age than to hers. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just sat there on my couch holding my phone, trying to find the right words and failing completely. I said, "Mom, how old did you say he was?" She said, 28. And before you say anything, I know what you're thinking, and I just want you to know that age is just a number and he is incredibly mature for his age. I had never in my life wanted to be less right about something. I tried to be calm about it. I really did. I asked her how they met, how long they had been seeing each other, what he did for work. She answered every question with this warmth in her voice that I recognized, and that made everything worse, because it meant she actually liked him, like really liked him, not just casually enjoyed his company. She had met him at a bookshop 3 months earlier. He worked there part-time while finishing his master's degree. They had talked for 2 hours about a book they had both read, and he had asked for her number before she left, and she had given it to him because, and I am quoting her directly here, she thought it would be rude not to. 3 months. She had been seeing this man for 3 months and I was only hearing about it now. I asked her why she hadn't told me sooner, and she said she knew I would react exactly the way I was reacting, which was, honestly, fair. But it didn't make me feel better about any of it. I spent the next week trying to talk her out of it. Not aggressively, not cruelly, but persistently, the way you do when you're convinced you're protecting someone you love from a mistake they can't see clearly. I sent her articles. I asked careful questions designed to make her think about what she was doing. I called her twice more than usual and spent most of both calls steering the conversation toward topics like life stages and long-term compatibility. My mom listened to all of it patiently, and then she said, "I would really like you to meet him. Just dinner. Just once. And then you can tell me what you think." I agreed, because I love my mother and because I was absolutely certain that meeting him in person would prove every single concern I had completely justified. I was not prepared for what actually happened when that door opened. I drove to my mom's apartment on a Saturday evening, and I spent most of the drive mentally preparing a list of red flags to watch for. Too much eye contact. Too little eye contact. Answers that felt rehearsed. Compliments that felt calculated. Any sign at all that this man was performing rather than simply being, because in my experience, people who are after something always perform. I knocked on the door feeling ready for anything. The door opened, and I was not ready for anything. He was tall, dark-haired, and wearing a plain gray sweater, and he looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as the specific panic of someone who has just opened a door and found exactly the person they were most nervous about seeing. Because he knew me. And I knew him. His name wasn't just Jake. It was Jake Mercer, and we had been in the same class for 3 years in high school, and I had sat 2 rows behind him in English literature for an entire semester, and I had borrowed his notes once when I missed a week of school and never properly thanked him for it. We stood there in the doorway staring at each other for what felt like a very long time. He said, "Oh. You're Sarah's daughter." I said, "You went to Westfield High." He said, "Yeah." I said, "We were in the same English class." He said, "I know. You borrowed my notes junior year." I had no idea what to do with any of this information, so I did the only thing I could think of, which was to walk inside and pretend that I was a completely normal person having a completely normal dinner with my mother and her boyfriend who I had apparently gone to school with for 3 years. My mom was in the kitchen and had no idea what had just happened in the hallway. She came out with a dish towel over her shoulder and kissed me on the cheek and said dinner would be ready in 20 minutes, and I sat down at the table across from Jake Mercer and tried to arrange my face into something that didn't look like I was having a minor internal crisis. He was trying too. I could see it. He kept his hands wrapped around his glass and answered my questions carefully, the way someone does when they know they're being assessed and have decided to just be honest rather than try to manage the impression they're making. I asked him about his degree. He was studying literature, finishing his thesis on 20th century American fiction, and when he talked about it he lost some of the nervousness and just became interested, the way people do when you ask them about the thing they actually care about. I remembered that about him, vaguely, that he was quiet in class but always had something specific to say when he spoke. I asked him how long he had known my mom was my mom. He said he had figured it out on their second date when she mentioned her daughter's name. I asked him why he hadn't said anything, and he said, honestly, I wasn't sure how to bring it up, and I thought it might be better coming from her. That was, I had to admit, a reasonable answer. My mom moved in and out of the kitchen during all of this, occasionally joining the conversation, occasionally leaving us alone, and I noticed something during those moments that I hadn't expected to notice. I noticed the way she moved when he was in the room. Lighter, somehow. More at ease in her own body than I had seen her in a long time. And I noticed the way he watched her when she wasn't looking at him. Not the way someone watches a person they're performing for. The way someone watches a person they genuinely can't quite believe they get to be around. It was a quiet thing. Small. But I had spent 30 years watching my mother, and I knew the difference between someone who made her feel good about herself and someone who actually saw her, and this man, this 28-year-old man who had sat 2 rows in front of me in English class, actually saw her. Dinner was good. The conversation was easy in a way I hadn't expected it to be, and by the time my mom brought out dessert I had stopped mentally running through my list of red flags because none of them had appeared and I was running out of reasons to keep looking. After dinner my mom went to make coffee, and Jake and I sat across from each other in the quiet of the dining room, and he looked at me directly and said, I know this is strange. I know it's a lot to take in. And I know you're not sure about me yet, and that's completely fair. But I want you to know that I am not going anywhere, and I'm not here for any reason except that your mother is the most interesting person I have ever met in my life. I looked at him for a moment. And then I said, she borrowed your notes too, didn't she? At the bookshop. She took a recommendation from you and then came back to tell you what she thought of it. He smiled, and it was the most genuine thing I had seen all evening, and he said, 3 times. She came back 3 times before I asked for her number. My mom came back in with the coffee, and she looked at the two of us and immediately knew something had shifted, and she set the cups down and said, okay, what did I miss? I looked at her across the table, and I said, Mom, I owe you an apology. And I owe Jake one too, because I spent the last week trying to talk you out of something that I had already decided was wrong before I knew anything about it. And I was wrong. Not about everything, I reserve the right to still find this a little weird, but about him. I was wrong about him. My mom looked at me for a long moment with that expression she has, the one that means she already knew how this was going to go and she was just waiting for me to catch up. She said, I know, sweetheart. I know. And then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and Jake quietly picked up his coffee cup, and outside the window the city moved on the way it always does, ordinary and indifferent, while inside that apartment something small and important settled into place between the 3 of us.